Well, if you have your Bible study out tonight, let's go right to the Proverbs of our fathers. We've been on lesson 7 this week, and numbers of other lessons to continue to go, but we certainly appreciate your time. There's a few pictures of my dad. If you can show those again, if you would, please. We're talking about Proverbs of my father, and these are some men. These are some thoughts that my dad wrote down when he was raising children, and people would ask him, said, how'd you raise your kids, and things of that nature, and he started writing down some things that were meaningful to him that he did while he was raising us. This is my mom, my dad, back in the late 60s, and then this is all of us together. I'm in the middle there at the top, and then my mom, my dad, my brothers Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jana, and Mary are there. Go ahead. I think there's maybe, that's all the pictures there. All right. But we want to, just so you know, he went home to be with the Lord in February of 1995, would be 22 years this coming year. And I miss him very much, but I'm very grateful for the influence that he had in my life and grateful for the things that he taught me and my siblings. We moved around quite a bit. He did not leave me a dime when he left. He has not left me an inheritance. And when my dad died, he did not have all the things prepared financially that maybe some parents have. I did not get an inheritance. Did not get any money from my father. But that doesn't matter to me. He gave me something far greater than that. He gave me a life that honored the Lord. He gave me principles that taught me. He gave me the Word of God. He kept me in local churches like this one. He took me every Sunday night, Wednesday night, Sunday morning, every Sunday school class. If there was a camp, I went to it. If there was a youth activity, went to it. He would insist we would go. After I was in 3rd grade, he decided I would go to a Christian school and try to get a Christian education. And he took care of making sure for the next 9 years of my schooling and all the years of my siblings were in a Christian education. My dad loved us, and I'm very grateful for that. And he taught us a few things that were very helpful. We went through this. Some of you are joining us for the first time in this study because you've been in Transformer Kids Club. And maybe next time we talk about this, I'll give you a quick review and maybe a few more pictures so you can be able to see a little bit more about that. But tonight we're on lesson 7, and we'll look real quickly at this thought. Teach your children to be a friend at all times. I was preaching in Lebanon, Missouri this Monday night, and drove down there to southern Missouri and get ready to preach. And before I got ready to go up there, a man came and shook my hand. He said, "Hey, I was your dad's roommate in college." And I said, "Okay, your name is Scott Miller," and my dad talked about Scott. And he said to me, and it's kind of interesting, I'm studying this, and he goes, "Your dad was such a good friend. He was such a good friend to me. And I'm so grateful for your dad." And of course, my dad's been gone for 22 years. This man has outlived my father by probably these last 22 years. But he told me that personally, that your dad was such a good friend to me. I will ever be grateful for your dad. But he taught that to his children. We're not all we ought to be in this area, but he really worked on this. And I want you to be a friend to everybody, John. I want you to be a friend to everybody. Don't you just hang out with the cool kids. If there's a new kid in Sunday school, you go sit with them. Don't just sit with your group. You go sit with the new child. You make them feel welcome. You decide you're going to be a welcoming committee of one. That didn't come from me. That came from my dad. Find a way that you can be a help and a blessing. Go out of your way to be a friend. Invite some over to the house. Our home was a revolving door. People would eat with us. They would stay with us. My dad was a friend to his friend. Of course, raised in an alcoholic's home. His mother eventually would die with cirrhosis of the liver. And yet, from that first-generation Christian that he was, he taught us to be a good friend. Some of the principles on friendship he taught us were found in Proverbs chapter 27. If you have your Bibles, turn there if you would, please. And I want to give them to you fairly quickly because I don't want to take all the time tonight just on the first lesson we'll talk about. But teach your children to be a friend. And by the way, much is taught through mentoring, but more is taught through modeling. Monkey see, monkey do. If you do it, your kids will do it. This stuff of, do what I say, not what I do, that will not work. That will breed frustration, rebellion. Children hate to be provoked to anger by the pharisaical, hypocritical conduct of us as parents. And I've done that before. And I hurt my children when I say, don't yell, and I'm yelling. When I do something, and by the way, when we do that, learn to apologize quickly. Learn to say, we all mess up. I'm amazed how quick my children will forgive me. They've had a lot of practice at it. But they'll forgive me. Ask them to forgive you. Some of us, we've hurt our children, and it's been years ago, we haven't gone back and apologized to them. And God brings it to our mind. And if God speaks to us, we ought to speak back to Him in words of confession and agreement, and whatever He wants me to do, that's what I should do with that. But be a good friend. Here are a few things. Proverbs chapter 27, here's a few principles about friendship that my father reminded me of. Number 1, read verse 1 with me. Are you ready? Boast not thyself of tomorrow, for thou knowest not what a day may bring forth. Number 1, don't take your friendships for granted. Today we said goodbye to Miss Merlinda Arroyo, 34 years old. How many of you are older than 34 years old? Would you raise your hand? Most of us, we've all outlived 34-year-old Miss Merlinda. And most of you who are younger than 34 will live past 34. Not all of us are guaranteed to do that. I think about our speaker tonight, our missionary, the thing that really caused him to evaluate his own, what am I doing with my life, was a loss of a cousin or a family member. And it should stir us up. Boast not. Don't take your friendships for granted. Can you write a note? Write it today. Can you call? Can you give? Can you serve? Can you encourage? Do it today. So, well, I'll do it next week. You don't know that next week you're going to have that chance. Don't take your friendships for granted. Next thing, if you would please, verse number 2. Look at that, if you would please. These are all verses on friendship. Let another man praise thee, and not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. If you and I want to be a good friend, we will not brag on ourselves. No one enjoys fellowship with someone who always talks about themselves, always brags about themselves. He said, let another man praise thee, not thine own mouth, a stranger, and not thine own lips. If you're good at something, let someone else say that about you. Rather than go around and say, oh yeah, I can do this, I can dribble this, I can dunk this, I can spike this, I make grade A, I make great grades. Let someone else help you with that. And you'll find that people that talk about themselves usually end up in a rest home drooling themselves in the corner with no friends. And wondering, how come I don't have any friends? Because you spent your whole life thinking about you, talking about you. And these are some issues. Number 3, look at that if you would please. The Bible tells us in verse number 3, a stone is heavy and sand is weighty, but a fool's wrath is heavier than them both. If you're going to be a good friend, you must learn to master your temper. We'll talk more about that later. But you angry people, the Bible tells us in another passage of Scripture, make no friendship with an angry man. He said, if you have to deliver him one time, you have to do it over and over again. Angry men do not make good husbands, loving fathers. Angry ladies do not make sweet wives and godly mothers. They've got to deal with that. And folks who struggle with anger, they have a limited amount of friendships. I have oftentimes dealt with people, and I'm not being critical, but they'll say, I don't have any friends. And they'll throw a fit right in front of me, and I say, that's why. You're angry. You're mad. I don't have any friends. You'd be mad too if you don't have any friends. Well, I'm just telling you, if you go out and be friendly and deal with your anger issues, you'll probably be more of an attractive magnet rather than a repellent. If we want to be a good friend, don't take your friendships for granted. Don't brag on yourself. Master your temper. Look at verse number 4 if you would. Wrath is cruel. When you lose your temper, that's a cruel thing. It puts everyone else on edge. Anger is outrageous. That's terrible. But who is able to stand before, what's the last word there? Envy. Envy is a little step beyond jealousy. Jealousy is something happens to somebody else and I'm kind of, I wish it happened to me. That's jealousy, or more, I feel bad about it. But envy is like, if it can't happen to me, I don't want it happening to you. Wanting it to be taken away. I remember years ago, one of my brothers, we were out fishing, and he caught this big fish. And I was about 11, 12, and he was a little younger than me, and it seems like he was always so lucky. I accidentally let that big fish go, and at the end, I didn't accidentally do it. I did it on purpose. If I couldn't catch a fish, I didn't want him to walk home and show my mom and dad that. It's terrible, embarrassing. To this day, it's embarrassing I did that. But that's envy. It's a green-eyed monster. And it keeps you from having the friendships. You know, oftentimes, the enemy of contentment is comparison. Most of us, God's been very good to us. Matter of fact, how many would say, God has been good to me? God's been good to you, yes. But we struggle with that when we start looking around and say, well, yeah, but I don't have what they have. And when you start comparing yourself with somebody else, then you're going to find you're going to lose contentment, and then jealousy and envy are going to start spiking in your life and complicating your friendships. Look at the next one, if you would, please. We want to guard against envy. That's letter D. Letter E, be truthful and helpful to your friends. Verses 6 through 9. Let me ask all the men to read that with me. Would you, men? Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. The full soul loatheth in honeycomb, but to the hungry soul every bitter. As a bird that wanders from her nest. Okay, so verses 6 through 9 talk about kind of interacting with your friends. He said, faithful are the wounds of a friend. A real friend stabs you in the front, okay? They don't stab you in the back. They stab you in the front. They will occasionally hurt you with something they see in my life or your life that needs to be changed. By the way, if you don't have a relationship with somebody, it's very difficult to confront them with things. Sometimes, when you put a rule on someone or you give them, you wonder why they didn't take it, it was because they didn't think they loved you. You loved them. But when you have a real friend, they'll occasionally wound you with, I don't think you should have done that. When you have a friend that always agrees with you, you don't have a friend. And they always say, man, I got some man, I told them off. That's what I would have done too. Good job, man. That's great. Not necessarily your best friend. Sometimes a friend says, are you listening to yourself? Is that right? Think God was honored with that? Boy, that's a friend who will sometimes say, I'm not mad at you, but boy, I don't think you should have done that. Faithful the wounds of a friend. This says, the bird wanders from her nest, so is a man who wandered from his place. Good friends usually are very careful where they go and what they say and what they do. Sometimes you need to keep your nose out of someone else's business. Stay in your place, stay on your side of the fence, and unsought advice is seldom heeded and usually resented. Be careful to stay in your place. We say it this way today, stay on your rug. Someone say, I think I was off my rug, but I had to tell them. I think maybe you should have stayed on your rug. Maybe it's a good idea. So he says, a bird wanders from his place, so a man. He wandered from his place there. Look, if you would please, letter F. Verse number 10, read it out loud. Let me have the ladies read out loud on number 10. Are you ready? Girls, thine own friend forsake not. Neither go into thy brother's house in the day of thy calamity. Here the Bible tells us that we need to step in when others step out. We need to be friends or people who are there to help. And he says here, whenever someone needs help, don't forget them. Help them. Try to assist hurting people. Step in when others step out. Letter G, gravitate to the underdog and the outcast. And this is something that I thank my dad very much for. I don't know, maybe it's because it was the way he was raised, but my father would gravitate to those who were having the hardest time. If there was someone who was not going to be picked on a team, he would pick that person. And he might even pick them first, because he didn't want them to feel what it was like to be picked last. He would find somebody that was struggling, and he would sit with them. Somebody would tell me this. He would say, all right, we'd go to a place, maybe a field trip or something like that. He might have driven the bus or gone with me. And he would see a loner over there. And he said, John, go over and sit with him. I said, well, Dad, I want to. No, go sit with him. Make him feel like he's special. Gravitate to the underdog. Gravitate to the one that's more outcast. Now, that doesn't come natural. I didn't want to do that. My children don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. We want to go where places where people like us, know us, and we don't have to have a risk to be around them. But boy, when you find somebody who maybe has it just a little harder than you, when maybe their skin color is different than yours, or their economic background is different, and you're not comfortable on their turf, or maybe you don't have the same background. We oftentimes gravitate to people of our own background. But I do believe friendship principles are learning to help people that are maybe different than us, and gravitate to those who are struggling, gravitate to the ones who are lonely. Brother Hiles would say years ago that not one young person would ever go wrong if he knew that one person sincerely cared about them. If he knew that one person cared about them. So many, the devil's been so successful to cause rejection in many of our lives. We're hurting. Some folks, they're beautiful adults, beautiful ladies, beautiful men, handsome men, but they've suffered from rejection from childhood. And you wonder why they are. Almost everybody who has kind of maybe challenging situations, there's a reason for that. Many of us, we don't have that problem. Most of us, we have some difficult days, very few bad days. But we need to learn to gravitate to the hurting people. Young people, listen to me. And by the way, moms and dads, this can be mentored and taught, but it also needs to be modeled. We can talk about what we're going to do at Christmas time. Is it all going to be about us, our family? A few years, we try to every year to go to some place that where things are more challenging than us. Because if not careful, our kids get real selfish. It's just more and more and more, how much more? And then they get the comparison. Their friend calls, I got this, what did you get? Well, I got the same thing. I just didn't get everything I wanted. We've gone, one year we went, I can't remember who we went with, Brother Gary Harper. I think we went with them, and also Brother Culler. Went over to a little home not too far away from here. I think it's in Lansing. But every child in that place has severe physical deformities. They live there. They live there, and every one of them, they can't talk, they can't swallow, their arms are mangled, their feet are clubbed. Everyone who came in there had to come in a wheelchair, or a couple of them came in on a walker. We're talking about 10-year-olds, 9-year-olds, and almost all of them have been abandoned by their families and turned over to the ward of the state. Well, we went in there, all of a sudden, what we got for Christmas didn't really matter. We've seen now somebody who didn't even have a mom and dad that claimed them. Their parents are overwhelmed by their disabilities and just turned them over to social workers, and now they live in a home. Go to a nursing home. Go to a hospital ward. Go someplace where maybe somebody who has it less than you, and try to minister to somebody. Gravitate to the outcast and to those that are hurting. Let's look at another one real quickly, if you would please. Verse number 14. Look at that one if you would. Let's read it all together. He that blesses his friend with a loud voice. This principle is be sensitive and do not take advantage of your friendships. Be sensitive to others. He said if a guy comes in and early in the morning starts yelling and hollering, it's irritating. So is someone who always takes advantage of friends. Oh, hey, can I borrow money? Can I borrow money? Can I borrow money? It's always, yeah, they're your friend. Yes, they give you money, but always, my name is Jimmy, take all you give me. You know, I need. They're always knocking on the door, taking advantage of the friendship. He says, don't do that. He said, it's rude. Be sensitive to your friends. And then look at the last one, verse number 17. As iron sharpeneth iron, so a man sharpeneth the countenance of his friend. And here the principle is strengthen and encourage your friends on purpose. Decide I want to strengthen and encourage my friends. You know, some of us get happy when you walk in the room. Some of us get happy when you walk out. And that has a lot to do if you care about me. If you sharpen me. If I sharpen you. You know, some folks, they just constantly drain you. Their texts are draining. Their calls are draining. They're always needy. And, when they come into you, you just know, God bless you. And mature Christians, they learn to handle that. But I don't want to be that way. God says, iron sharpens iron. So a friend sharpens the countenance of his friend. You know, when people come to you and I, they ought to be able to feel like, man, I like being around them. They make me happy. They encourage me. They strengthen me. For some of us, we hurt people because we're hurting, and that's what we do. These are principles in friendships, and that's the first principle. I must hasten. We're gonna close. We'll do one more real quickly. Teach them to be a friend at all times to their friends. Number 2, and we'll stop with this. Teach them to be a good sport, or don't play. Learn to control your temper. Once again, these are off the pages of a notebook my dad wrote. He said, teach them to be a good sport, or don't play. Learn to control your temper. Lots of verses on that. I love sports. I love to see a young man. I was watching the kids sing the other day in the Christmas program, and I enjoy seeing young people that will blend music and athletics. I think if you can do that, even if you don't really enjoy one or the other, you should do it. I love to see young men and young ladies who are good at music also be good at athletics. Think of Brother Waterhouse and what a gifted servant of Christ he is for the work of the Lord, and we rejoice with what God's used him to do. But he's an unbelievable pianist. But on purpose, he said, growing up, I would make sure, even if I wasn't a great athlete, I wasn't the best out there, I would just work hard to learn how to dribble a basketball, learn how to throw a football, to catch it, to run, because I wanted to be, and we've talked about this. I think it's what makes him a very valuable servant of God and someone now that is very respected. And learning to be good at different things. You know, remember this, all of us are adding things to our toolbox. If you only say, I'm only good at this and that's all I'm going to learn, you're going to limit your abilities long term. Help your children diversify. Help them learn several things. If they're only good at one thing, then if that thing is not needed, then they're going to be struggling. I had a guy at work one time, and he says, I don't want to learn anything because they might ask me to do it. But you know, that man has a cap to his abilities and what's going to happen to him. And I've seen it. I've lived long enough now. He's a few years older than me now. And that's been his attitude his whole life. Get by with the least I can do. I don't want anyone to know I know to do something. They might ask me to do it. And now he struggles. Struggles economically. He struggles in his family. It's because there's laziness there. He's not willing to learn and diversify. But the same is true with athletics. I want to encourage you. Play sports, but keep a good spirit. Keep a good attitude. I love watching our young men participate, our young ladies, and enjoy that. It's fun. I was watching our young people play, and whenever they didn't get what they wanted, they hit the ball down real hard. Or they argue with the ref. They lose their temper whenever they do something wrong, or someone does something wrong with them, and it's all over them. And I'm all for competitiveness, but keep your temper in check. Keep that temper. Let's look at a couple verses and we'll close with that. Let's look at the verses. Go to Proverbs. We're in Proverbs. Go to chapter 12, verse 16. Let's see what God has to say. Remember my dad, boy, he would get all over us if we lose our temper, and we'd get our lecture all the way home and oftentimes be dealt with. Look at chapter 12, verse number 16. Let's read that loud together. You ready? A fool's wrath is presently... When a fool's angry, everybody knows it. He makes sure everybody knows he's mad. He kicks a chair. He yells his head off. He looks with a snarl. He hits, stomps. A fool's wrath, everybody knows when a fool's mad. He makes sure of it. But a prudent man covereth the embarrassment of that. Many of us know the name Bobby Knight. He's an unbelievable coach. But most of us know one of his worst decisions he made. What did he do? He threw a chair across the floor. Woody Hayes, a great coach for Ohio State University. But in my mind, when I see Woody Hayes, I see him grabbing hold of an opposing player and slapping and punching. Why? Because he lost his temper. Didn't cover the embarrassment of that. And to keep doing it over and over again. Let's look at another verse real quickly, if you can, please. Look at Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. 16:32. He that is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he that ruleth the spirit than he that taketh a city. Of wonderful principle, will not elaborate. Chapter 19 and verse 11. Chapter 19, verse 11. Let's read this verse together, can we? The discretion of a man deferreth his anger, and it's his glory to pass over a transgression. He said it's a man's discretion that puts off his anger. The Bible tells in chapter 15, to be a soft answer turneth away wrath. James chapter 1, verse 20, one of my favorite verses on anger in the Bible, it says this. It says, the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. When my anger is upset. Now, by the way, anger is not a sin in and of itself. The Bible tells that God gets angry. There is a righteous indignation, but most of the time, anger crosses over into an area of wrath and out of control. And when anger is upset, then I will not do what God wants me to do. I'll start saying things I shouldn't say. I'll hurt people. I'll hurt myself. I'll hurt my future. I'll complicate things. I'll embarrass myself. But a prudent man covereth the embarrassment of those things. 2 lessons tonight. 1, learn to be a good friend. Teach our children to be a good friend. Number 2, teach our children to defer anger. Enjoy sports, but keep your temper under control. Don't lose your temper. There's nothing manly about losing your temper on a basketball floor or a volleyball court or things of that nature. No. Keep your temper under control. God lets you do that, and He wants us to. Let's stand together if we can, please.